And welcome back to another how to draw like video, focusing on drawing scenery in the style of Tim Burton. This video is going to look at flooring. I've drawn out a couple of very rough and very standard types of ground you get normally, your sort of basic grey concrete type ground, and then you've got your sort of grassy type ground here. So these are normal world ones, and we're going to have a look at an example of a type of ground that you might find within the Tim Burton world. So to start off with, mark your outline, the sort of where you want your floor to finish, so where ground begins and background or foreground kind of starts. And what we want to start off doing is shading this in. Now, ideally, I'd use a charcoal stick to do this with. If you haven't got one, then a pencil will be okay. Don't press too hard with a pencil though. Try and keep the shading light, but you want it dark enough so that you can rub bits out and it's noticeable, but we'll get to that in just a bit. So if I can find my charcoal stick, I will shade this in quickly. I'm going to try and keep it quite smooth as well. Bring that line all the way up to your marker line that you put in. I'm going to bring it down just a little way to make it easier to demonstrate what the technique we're going to use is. So next we want to blend that in a little bit. So I'm going to use a stump, which is just compressed paper. If you haven't got one of these, then use some tissue if you can. What you just want to do is smooth that up a little bit to begin with. Don't press too hard. I'm just trying to blend the grey in. To get a smooth grey surface. Okay, and the next step, ideally I'd recommend to use a putty rubber for the next step. If you haven't got one, a normal rubber would be okay, but I would suggest modifying it slightly. Perhaps use a pair of scissors on it to kind of cut the piece off so that you get a kind of sharp, jagged point. So what we want is something kind of this shape with a bit of a tip on the end. And you'll need to keep refreshing that tip as well, because it's going to collect the charcoal dust as we work away along the drawing. So you'll find if you use a normal rubber, you might need to trim the end a bit each time it gets a bit charcoaly, whereas the putty rubber you can kind of just fold it in and roll a new point that's a bit cleaner. But what we're going to do now is put in a kind of a grainy, I suppose the easiest way of describing it is it's very similar to sort of a fingerprint texture. Like if you looked at a fingerprint really close up, the texture that you'd find there. And we're going to apply that to the ground, and this could be used in a muddy kind of setting, or a grassy setting, or even where you'd find concrete normally. It's entirely up to you, but as you can see there, I'm taking some of the grey back out again to give this textury look to the ground. My putty rubber's actually seen better days, so it's not taking off quite as much grey as I'd like it to, but in an ideal world this would be looking a little bit whiter. You just want to keep putting in these sort of triangular shapes and then smaller lines coming off of them. And you don't need to keep them going in exactly the same direction as each other, but try and kind of follow a sort of a flow. Don't suddenly go completely the opposite way. You can kind of go into swirls with them if you want, but I'd recommend sort of feeding round into a swirl, not just putting a random one in, because it might look a bit out of place. We're just going to work our way along doing this. Couple more lines in. Again, remember this would look a bit more effective if my putty rubber were a bit cleaner. So we've got some basic markings on that now. So the next step is to add a little bit of highlight to these, just to make them stand out a bit more and look a little bit more 3D. What we're essentially trying to do is give this a sort of plasticine look in a way, like the ground does in some of his films. So I'm using a graphite pencil. Now you can use whatever you want for this bit. I recommend something with a little bit of darkness to it, so perhaps a 4B. You could use a charcoal pencil with a bit of a point. I wouldn't recommend using a charcoal stick for this unless you've got a very, very steady hand. But just something that you can highlight some of the edges of these lines with, and you can either highlight both edges or just the one edge or parts of the edge, whatever takes your fancy really. So you see that I'm going with kind of highlighting most of each side of these lines. So I'm going to carry on putting these lines in, and I'll come back for the final part of the video. I've highlighted all these bits that we rubbed out, so now the final bit really is to add a tiny bit more shading in, so we can pop this under the edge of one side of them. Try and keep this edge the same each time. We want to give the effect that they're slightly raised, and just carry on doing that. For the rest of the drawing. Just doing mine quite roughly, just to give you a general gist. And we'll just darken our top edge up a little bit more again. Sorry, camera went off a bit. Then just blend that down into where our ground starts, like so. That gives you an idea how to try and get that textured plasticine ground look. I hope you found this video helpful, and please keep checking back for more videos. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.